my doctoral dissertation as I am acknowledging those who were formative, both in coming to seminary and then in moving in the direction of graduate study. I name both Grover Wright and Clarence Lee. Grover knew that I was more interested in law school than I was in seminary, but he kept dropping that water on that piece of stone, and at one point I made the decision to come to seminary, came in 1974. And in 1975 then, Dr. Clarence Lee, who was professor of early and medieval church history, invited me to dinner and suggested that I had the gifts for graduate theological education, and that he really wanted me to seriously consider going on to graduate school with the possibility of coming back to Mount Airy and teaching. And that actually had been a long tradition at Mount Airy Seminary, where given students were identified and then encouraged by the faculty and individual faculty members to do what Clarence was inviting me to do. As a student, I am reminded of the fact that I think it was in my first year that I was the only black student on campus. Dr. Charles Leonard at the time, I believe, was on internship. And when I finally graduated, I believe I was the 7th African American Lutheran student to graduate from the seminary and to move on. Gratefully since then, we've had so many more, especially African American Lutheran students, as well as students, black students of other traditions. I remember an excellent faculty that in our second year of seminary, which was Dr. Lazarus' last year on the faculty. We had him the entire year for systematics and ethics because Dr. Lyman Lundeen was on sabbatical. And it was a real gift to be able to be taught by Dr. Lazarus. So that's a wonderful memory. And I think in my third year, I remember Dr. James Cone, the African American theologian, coming to spend some time with a class that Clarence Lee and John Parkinson were teaching. And I still have a copy of his first book, Black Theology and Black Power, in which he wrote to my dear friend who asked many and hard questions about violence. So those would be some of the highlights. There would be so many more. Clarence Lee and his wife Kathy held a party for me when I was admitted to graduate school and as I was about to go off. I have fond memories of basketball games in the gym and flag football games with different schools in the area. So I felt very much supported by the seminary. The scholarship and financial aid assistance was very generous. I basically left seminary with no educational debt that I would certainly wish for every student graduating in these days. So those would be some of my memories. George Farrell was our commencement speaker. Gerhard Krodel had a real flair in the classroom. The faculty was just magnificent. Jack Ruman, Leroy Aden, Clarence Lee, just the Foster McCurley. You could just go down the list. Oliver Olson, who I thought was an excellent professor of confessions and certainly grounded me in the Lutheran confessional tradition. The first class that I ever taught was composed of people who were not that much younger than I was. but who were incredibly supportive and encouraging as this new faculty member tried to learn the art of teaching. And they were very generous in their cooperation. They helped me to understand what I was doing right and what I needed to do better. And I still have a number of personal friends now, actually, out of that first and second year classes. I remember trying to become comfortable with calling my former professors, who I held in high esteem, my colleagues. I did indicate maybe yesterday that I had to stand in front of the mirror and practice saying to Dr. Ruman, "Well, good morning, Jack, how's it going?" Because there was a clear sense of respect and esteem that translated into addressing him in a proper fashion. So I remember developing courses initially. I remember the call process that led to Katie Day coming on to the faculty in 1985. And I remember that so well because our daughter was born early morning of her interview. And so after the birth took place, I immediately rushed home to clean up and then went to the president's office for this interview that yielded this excellent faculty member. So those would be some of the memories. I think as we moved towards the late 80s, we had a number of resignations or retirements that led us into call processes that called people like Bob Robinson and others. So it was a period of significant transition. It was for me an unexpected but very significant development. The seminary had just completed a presidential search process that had led the faculty not to be in entire agreement about the direction in which the seminary should be heading. At the time, Faith Rohrbaugh was dean. She had been a major contender for the position that Bob Hughes finally received. While I deeply respected and appreciated Bob Hughes, who had been very supportive of me over the years dating back to seminary, I was very much interested in seeing Faith become president since she had been dean for so long. So coming out of that presidential search process, Bob came to me one day and said, you know, I would like you to consider serving as my dean, which again was totally unexpected. But after that happened, we entered into a period of significant healing and growing together as these two groups within the faculty felt that they had representatives within the administration who over time worked very well together. So that's what I remember at the beginning of my tenure as dean. I do remember inviting Paul Rajashekar to consider coming to Philadelphia Seminary, which he ultimately did, and we were actually tenured on the same day in the same service. Beyond Richard Stewart as the second black scholar, I ended up going to Puerto Rico to invite Nelson Rivera to become a scholar of color, and we refashioned the proposal and then brought him on board. We went through an MSA ATS 10-year review process that was very significant in the life of the institution. And so that was another significant highlight for me. We experienced the tragic death of Michael Mueller, the young systematician who had come here from the former East Germany, who, while on sabbatical, if I recall correctly, was hit by a car and ultimately killed. So that was a very difficult time in the life of the institution. But we came together and saw our way through that. So those would be some of the highlights. Certainly the UTI continued to develop. I give profound credit there to Faith Robaugh, who entered initially into discussions that brought that program to the institution. And I tried very much to carry on the work that she had begun. So those would be some of the highlights. It's also the case that, at the very end of the 80s and maybe into 1990, we called people like Bob Robinson, Tim Wengert, Robin Madison, and certainly the seminary's current president, Philip Cray. And that set the seminary on a very, very good trajectory for the next several years. Richard Stewart would also have been a part of that mix. So I have very fond memories of a faculty that seemed to work well together, that was growing together, that was figuring out how to craft a new curriculum, which we also did in that period. And my challenge was essentially to support their ministry of teaching and learning in the classroom. And that's how I saw my deanship, also working with the president to execute whatever initiatives he felt were in the academic realm and that needed to be carried out. Of course, the student body as a whole became far more diverse. Largely because of the presence of the UTI. Now, at the same time, there was a sense that evening and Saturday courses were for, generically speaking, black church Christians, and Lutheran students really needed to take the daytime courses. Thankfully, over time, that has evolved, but it did become more diverse because of the presence of UTI students out of the black church tradition. There were also a few more African American Lutheran students that were coming to the seminary, and so that represented a change. I think this was also a period in which the second career student phenomenon began to grow. And so even as you continued to have students right out of college, you saw an increasing number of second career students who wanted to go into one form of rostered ministry or another. And so the student body became more diverse in terms of age and experience, and led the faculty, therefore, to have some interesting conversations about how do you relate now to this emerging diversity, either of age and experience, or of racial ethnic background. Some of that has now been reversed because as a result of Lilly grant programs at the different colleges and a more robust recruiting on the part of synods, we're seeing more students coming directly from college into seminary. And I think I got to the point where I simply said, we want good students of whatever age and experience. And so now we have a good balance between first and second career students. We also had a steady number of Anglican or Episcopal students who were adding to the mix. So all of that was very, very salutary for this institution, and I suspect for other institutions as well. There will be what we understand to be seminary or theological education in the future. Whether it will take place in the context of the number of, for example, ELC seminaries that we currently have is an open question. And we've already experienced 2 of the 8 seminaries that have now merged into Lutheran colleges. My concern there is that I assume we have lost those assets to the Ministry of Theological Education in the ELCA. I think the cost of theological education today is encouraging us to think in new and innovative ways, more online courses so that people can stay where they live and work and not have to leave their places entirely in order to come to seminary to study. I think that as is the case at Luther, for example, if you can combine that kind of study with cohort courses of short duration on seminary campuses, that will stand everything in good stead. There are major questions now being raised about where internship ought to be placed. Should it be the 3rd year? Should it be the last year so that people only have to move once? I think there are increasing questions about whether pure academics can deliver everything that students need so that when they go into Paris they have the skills for ministry. Or is it better to have faculties that are blended with so-called pure theologians and parish practitioners? There are also major questions being raised about whether the MDiv degree needs to be the only degree that moves people into ministry, or whether there is another approach that can provide the kind of theological educations that people need today. I had a conversation with presiding Bishop Hansen shortly after the whole situation at Lutheran Seminary became public, and I think there's no question that theological education in the ELCA will have to be reconfigured. How that is done, I think, needs to involve clearly those who are involved in theological education. But I don't think we can assume that the seminaries that we currently have will necessarily be the seminaries of the future. LSTC, which I served for 14 years, was ultimately a consolidation of 6 institutions, a trinity of 2 institutions. Lutheran Seminary today of 2 institutions at least. So only time will tell. But I think the one thing that we can be assured of is that there will be theological education. People will continue to be engaged in a period of study so that they know the biblical and theological tradition and the historical witness of the faith and are able to develop practical skills for ministry. But in what context and how that will occur, I think only time will tell. A major difference between LSTC in Chicago and LTSP here in Philadelphia is that in Chicago there are approximately 12 other Christian seminaries. And so if you're a Methodist, you can go to Garrett. If you're Presbyterian, you can go to McCormick, et cetera, et cetera. There are far fewer seminaries here in the Philadelphia area that are mainline. And so I think one way of reading the history is that it's not so much that LTSP went out to the UTI constituency or to the Anglican constituency inviting them in. I think that ultimately happened. But it was out of their lack of access to theological education that they came to LTSP. And to its great credit, LTSP was receptive and open and has found a way not to be less Lutheran, but to be more ecumenical. And the challenge there is to continue to emphasize the Lutheran tradition, but in a way that is not sectarian, that is ecumenically hospitable and open, that respects other traditions, and that ultimately does recognize that our unity is in Jesus Christ. If we begin there as a starting point, which I think is the starting point of the Lutheran tradition, then we can explore the different ways in which we give theological articulation to how we understand the Christian faith. So I think LTSP is strategically situated here on the East Coast and specifically in Philadelphia to be a major theological resource in this community. And it's just really exciting to see how these different traditions interact. Bill Moore out of the UTI, who gets a Distinguished Service Award last night, the provisional presiding bishop of the Episcopal community, who's going to celebrate the Eucharist this morning in chapel prior to the Episcopal students gathering as an alumni association component. So I think the future is bright. I think there is a major question about the extent to which Christianity in the United States is becoming less denominational as it confronts all kinds of financial and secular and other forces. I don't think that means that we will lose our denominational distinctiveness. What it does mean is that we will have to be more ecumenically open to find those places where we can cooperate, where we can share, and where we can manifest the unity that we have in Jesus Christ. I think in the kind of world that we live today, where different communities rub shoulders, and where we no longer live in a kind of segregated environment, it is critically important that we find ways of developing deeper understanding and mutual respect of our respective traditions, while also continuing to give witness to our own respective traditions. I think this is what LSTC tried to do. We had a Lutheran couple that gave a major endowment to the institution to develop a Center of Christian-Muslim Relations for Peace and Justice, endowed a professorship. I know it's taken a slightly different form here, but the commitments are deeply the same. And I think it begins with interaction. It begins with sharing experiences of food and of fellowship. And it then does move in the direction of looking at each, especially of the three Abrahamic traditions, in deeper ways. There currently is at LSTC a periodic series where you bring together scholars to look at the texts of the three traditions as they relate to a common theme. I was once given a so-called Tolerance Award by the Niagara Foundation, which is composed of a group of Turkish Muslims who brought students to study Christianity at LSTC. When I resigned at LSTC, I remember that Dr. Asi, who is a kind of adjunct professor out of the Muslim tradition at LSTC, was very, very hospitable and welcoming, and wished me well as I left. So interaction is very important. Having an opportunity during Ramadan to break the fast, periodic evenings, is a wonderful way for people just to get to know one another on a human level, and then use that as a basis for finding ways to develop a deeper understanding and appreciation for the the gifts of these three traditions. And there was also a similar emphasis where the Jewish tradition was concerned. So.